thought I was just being tired. Well, that's all right. We can use that. Well, this is your response. So if we run out, yeah, that's what I was making it for today.
Sherab, how's it going? All is good? All right.
That's all right. We're not going to make more. No problem.
Devam be. Yavaş dur. Az dur. Az dur. Start with praise to Manjushri. Page 12.
Today is sensitive by glory and protecting Manjushri, symbolic of his seeing all things as they are. His understanding shines forth as the sun, unclouded by defilements or traces of ignorance. He teaches in 60 ways with patient love of heart of his only son.
Creatures caught in the prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of ignorance, overwhelmed by his suffering. Arise from the stricken of delusions and prisoners from the iron chains of our karma, whose powerful sword of wisdom heals our suffering wherever its parts are, clearing away the darkness of ignorance. Treat your Manjushri priestly bodies adorned with the 112 marks of the Buddha, completed the 10 stages achieving the highest perfection of Bodhisattva.
Who has been pure
from the beginning. O Manjushri, O loving one, with the presence of your wisdom, illuminate the darkness and close in my mind, enlighten my intelligence and wisdom so that I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the text that explain them.
Saji
Sangye Chodan Sopi Cholan La Chachu Dadu Dami Kazu Chu Dagi Chishu Bikatsama Cholan Benchi Sangye Rupa Shu Sangye Chodan Sopi Cholan La Chachu Dadu Dami Kazu Chu Dagi Chishu Bikatsama Cholan Benchi Sangye Rupa Shu Chodan Sopi Cholan La Chachu Dadu Dami Kazu Chu Dagi Chishu Bikatsama Rola Benches and Kangi Tuzini on the Tawatan, the Pamiche, Pamichun, the Padun Kela, Chancelo. All right, let's do some tea offering. Woohoo!
Sanjay Lama Che, Deshin Lama Ye, Kunji Chipo Lama Te, Lama Chipo.
니버 투비스 지데 따와세서 따오는 시치고 랑가 초스 따와 차세 참피레
Let's continue on from the point that we left off yesterday, just looking quickly at the text. Let's see where we are. So we're looking at the way to train in ethics of refraining from negative actions as part of the way to train in the conduct of guiding the mind by means of mindfulness and introspection. We started with making effort to purify all conduct of the three doors, and now we're looking at examining the conduct of body and speech. We've covered the first point in that section, which is examining one's motivation before acting with the body. Now we're going to continue with advice related to actions like looking and so forth. We've covered verse 35. Today we're going to pick up from point B, how to act when fatigued.
텐즈다 디 갈송거레스라운디 나우스를 체도 제당 하수마부 아니 때대바이나 셈양양 기는데 마도 아니 편도요 말레스 이내야 먼저 필요해 슈즈 초직도 혼 카드래야 아니 셈 마이기바도 소보다 아니 마데바요 까래야 아니 감 소야다 아니 도방앙소 세던 저거는 어디인지 체도 아니 파수다 때바이나 펜도용 그랬어.
So the first two lines in this verse says, to rest one's sight, one should occasionally look around. So what are we talking about here at this point? Well, we're saying that, first of all, how to focus one's gaze is to make sure that we do not lay our gaze, or kind of that we do not look around all over the place in a way that can give rise to excitation or mental wandering. Then the second point explains what to do when fatigued, in that it is possible that in certain occasions your mind would be fatigued, unhappy, there would be some sort of malaise that will set in. At this point, the text says, you need to get some rest, you need to recuperate.
대단하죠. 배나 믹스 찍으면이 데뷔 각도가 되니 삼성이야 강한테야가 소고 닝고라스 딘지 각도가야 아니 초신이야 삼당 투바나 배나 배나 먼저 사실 데리야 찍고 데리 각도가 삼성이야 녀나요야 마기와요 딘디 용시그라스 딘지 각도야 아니 비 데레 까데 직성도 땅 많이 봐 아니 그거 신이가 봐 먼저야지 아니 너좀 체에 아니 지 간지부터는 된자야고요래 딘지부터에 상당 투바이나스 초전에 상당 투바이나 아니 수수 아니 샘 기브로리스 봐
There are certain occasions when, for example, you observe one focal object and your mind becomes uncomfortable, or there is some sense of unhappiness that seeps in. Like, for example, in living in a place like that, in a center, there are occasions in which you might feel a little bit bored, or your mind will be made unhappy. It is possible that something like that happens. So rather than thinking that I'm staying here is a way to restrict my behavior, to confine me to a certain behavior, we want to adopt new perspectives on our situation. So rather than thinking that this place is restrictive, we think that actually living in a place like that is beneficial in terms of improving my study, gaining some stability with respect to my lifestyle. So if we adopt different perspectives, we look at a situation from another angle, it can certainly lift a certain degree of boredom or some sense of malaise.
이제 감소하다 더 따와 나서의 체들 젠가 밑에디 촉 따와 자오스
The commentary to this verse is short. It says to refresh one's constitution or when tired, when one can occasionally lift one's gaze and look around.
다스ум바 강사시 중동원을 지달다와니스 지달다와 자와니스 그는 딜러제 키친부르지 그래도 아스라 아니 가시 민람 한규나 때네모 렉시죠 람손지 따비체 양다연의 초스타스
The next point explains how to act when in the presence of other beings. We have 4 lines covering this section, so let's look at this verse. It says, when someone appears in the field of your vision, look up and say, it's good you came. To check whether there are dangers on the road, look repeatedly into the 4 directions.
지금 당분이 되기 가시 민남 환경은 때는 뭐 렉시저세기 지금 당분이 되기 배시 잔중 셈이야 잔중 셈이 쩌거든 잘나 고치에 요도스 여설의 상소를 그 먼저 잔중 셈이 나오니 잔중 셈이 또 현대의 미치니 신기 대대의 삶이 인지기 또기 아니 샴페인 주비 삼바 슈치 레비칼이야 잔주기 셈세고라서 다 샴페인 주야 샴페인 펜바 다 데워주 샴페인 슬라운드 샴페인 펜바 다 데워주 샴페인 디지털이야 아니 고 가사니 아니 샴페인 디지털이지 용기어라 진짜 페나 랑긴 듄드 간사신 모아나 아니 미키타 따츠츠니 아니 간사라야 아니 시험에 대화께지 용적으로 왔어. 인자 아니 소수인 든지 레온디 미신 레온디 델이야지 남에 담아만 봐. 안치 레만은 돈도 그 남길 때만 많이 봐. 근데 용해야 될이야. 가서 다시 렉수전 계란델라 페발이야. 가스 유스 number the David told me. And make that one not that the Yashudres.
So how do we relate to such instructions? Well, here it says a great meaning when we train in the practice of bodhicitta, the man of enlightenment. The man of enlightenment, bodhicitta, is focusing on the welfare of other living beings. So in focusing on the welfare of others, we develop compassion. We develop an altruistic intention, the wish to be of benefit to others, and thinking of the benefit and well-being of others. We wish them for happiness. We wish that we would provide others with happiness. So when you come across others, when you see them, when suddenly they come into your field of vision, motivated by this sense of wanting to be of benefit to others, you think, may I be able to provide that person with happiness? Rather than ignoring that person that is coming into your field of vision, or wishing that you hadn't met that person, that you had not seen that person, you think, welcome. May I be able to provide that person with happiness. So if you think about it like that, it is an excellent condition for the cultivation of the man of enlightenment.
That pena means mewa nonzo ane demchola ya sapema nima chak rojla ya ane devala ya ane 점점 용이 소리야. 아니 welcome you 아니 뭐든지 아니 지 파스지 저거는 낸데도지 간지 뭐랑 그거니 아니 간지오지 당능도 아니 간지오로 제베비 중에 통송스 인자 아니 딱 뭐로 gem바리 아니 삼반당다 제베디 아니 남주 토네냐 그리야 약결치 마도나 가샤 마치로치 삼삼은 뭐라 지금 샘펌비 넘버로치 당일에 야오시마다 간지 인도 samsa shikdos me sambananda ki me mambula ya kazing himato ya drupa and chobatin leon kunzo yamati chenjelati kunzo chishele predanto ni me de matsungana chi ni koso to dana sobatin and nyochepe mabu gyapsas and nyoche gyapse jela ji ramni chegodanto tamra moto chi na to kana sangana dro kunzo de ramni chirachi 가지 네 상황으로 난 파스 상황으로 돼야지. 이제 여기로 레드도 왔어.
So, for example, Ani Demchuk, during the weekend, is sometimes showing people around the property, welcoming them, introducing them to different parts of the property, the statues and so forth. If they have any questions or queries, she's happy to answer that. So she does that as a volunteer. And she's not young, right? So she's old. But Geshe says that it's at least in his mind, it seems that her attitude is genuine. Not only not always she appears to be cheerful. Sometimes it seems that kind of she has an appearance as if people are giving her a hard time. But Geshe said that it seems that she's doing that with a genuine attitude. Like, for example, a week or two ago, we had a visiting group of Buddhist people. Quite a few people came up, so she took them around the property, showed them different parts, she welcomed them. After that, showed them the office, the shop. They bought lots of stuff, statues and so forth. So she thought that maybe they need to consecrate the statues. She called Geshe and kind of he came down to the cafe and all those statues and so forth were consecrated. It's a good thing, isn't it? It's a good thing to welcome people in this way.
It
is in conformity with what Shantideva says here. When someone appears in the field of your vision, look up and say, it is good you came. It's good also to mention that at this point, Anichuki has also assumed the responsibility of making sure that we all abide by the rules and regulations and directions of the government related to COVID-19. So it is really important. We're experiencing this unique situation, special situation all across the world, and we need to follow the directions of the government. And Anichuki has taken upon herself the responsibility, first of all, to find out what's the latest news, what are the things that we need to do, what are the recommendations that we need to abide by, and she makes sure that we do that. So that's an excellent thing, and Geshe thinks that it's very important that not only we help her to do that, that we also support her in making sure that we behave in a way that is safe. Particularly, we need to keep in mind that there's another Buddhist center that has not followed the directions of the government. Someone was diagnosed with COVID-19, and the center had to subsequently close down, as it was closed down by the government. So we ought to make sure that we behave in a careful way, in a responsible way, so that that does not happen to us. Because if it does happen to us, first of all, it would be disheartening, it would be disappointing, and would not be fulfilling our obligation to act in a way that is safe. And in making sure that all of us abide by the rules and regulations, it is possible that some people will kind of show you these expressions if they're not happy with you. Yeah. that you're annoying them. So please don't get angry with them. No, if you get angry, sorry? Geshe is showing. Anyway, so Geshe said that if you get angry, it is only that your mind is becoming unhappy. So don't get angry with others if they show the disapproval of COVID-19. It's easier said than done, isn't it? It's hard to prevent anger from arising. It is hard to put a stop to anger. So Geshe is speaking about it, but he also admits that it is something that even for him, it's difficult to put into practice. So when we speak about those issues, particularly when we teach them to others, it's not helpful if you don't practice it yourself, or at least attempt to put it into practice. So Geshe in his role is speaking about those practices, is teaching those practices to others, but without putting it into practice himself, just telling others about it is not going to be helpful. So as much as we can, we want to attempt, we want to try as much as we can to also put them into practice.
Denja yosa ne emba namundu kanji and yamnen daji and odindi chiu kalaya and damada some down there the kasakal mita there the gasha is and gasha chimbo is inaya lam tosa jelaya and denja message in river kalaya and chorchilaya teaching drogoyadi penanganji and lamchin tolaya modatan modatan so and pasu taya the doing the gag the in taya kichimu shoot but then in drogo sungo sares ra.
The next two lines say to check whether there are dangers on the road, look repeatedly into the four directions. So suppose that you're practicing in a secluded place in isolation. If you're cultivating a certain practice in seclusion, then if your eyes are going to constantly gaze on your surrounding and you're going to look at different things, it will hinder your practice, your concentration. But when you're traveling somewhere in an isolated place or secluded place, you also need to make sure that rather than becoming just focused on one direction, one point, that you also check around to avoid dangers. It's just like saying that if you're driving down the highway, rather than being single pointed in looking only at one place on the road, you constantly check your surrounding, right? So you check what's going on to your right and left and behind when you're changing lanes and so forth. You check in all directions in order to avert dangers.
제 대대비는 같이 기람도 상원 규칙 dundu 준비 된 공부 렉시 적을 차고 제한 남도 시비세 람손 지고 예매 딱 비체 양다 양도 초스 따와 차오스.
Let's look at a commentary to these 4 lines. It says, if someone comes into one's field of vision while we have our eyes downcast, once they are in front of us, we smile at them and say how good you came. Also, while walking along a path, one needs to repeatedly look around in the 4 directions to check whether there are any dangers or not.
대시바 나우스 위치 지달 차와니스 나우스 칸 칩된 갭기 초스 따와차 dundu 갭도 따치니 조와야나 원차티스.
Now we're going to look at how to act when resting. Let's look at the next section. Again, we have 4 lines. So having directed your sight outwards during the break, look behind your back. Having checked in front and behind, go or come.
dirda nyanga yobata ani goba yobikavya ani nansu yitsina ani dunda gap yinyala tagoya di kechimbodes penantan jevinam ya nansu ni joyitse khani chedela chilla teni gap cho zela soba tawar chaw dunda gap ya sayo yeme so tawar chemi chedar ribi draw ya no chati was.
Also, when sitting down, when taking a rest, it's also important to make sure that you are checking around, looking around, also to avoid dangers. So it says in this section, further, having rested and setting out again, direct your attention outwards and look also behind your back for your possessions. Having checked whether in front or behind are any cliffs and so forth, one either continues along one's path or goes back as it is appropriate.
Sumbo cholom shena javanes tan rodu samayimba ani chi rocha nyandu ta khangi kaw shenias re yadabne ka khunju du gobashin chebachas.
Then Shantideva says, apply the same thing to other activities, not only walking or staying somewhere, but in all your activities, going, returning, sitting, standing, and so forth. So it says in the last 2 lines of verse 38, act in this way at all time upon understanding the purpose.
Tetatu gobala gaja de gobala teni ani cholam ketandi gaja gobala tagudos goba yobaina pena goba yobaina kavkala yachi ani sinjin shingi ani so chebala sobaina ya ani gobi wangi ani chegoya de lingu yoras ra.
When it says here, act in this way at all times upon understanding the purpose, in taking a certain course of action, you need to consider sometimes what the purpose of that action and the prohibition of acting in this way. You need to weigh those two situations, the prohibition and the necessity. Like, for example, though in general, it is prohibited to kill other living beings, there are situations in which you need to consider whether killing a certain sentient being would be the best course of action. And that point is illustrated in the accounts of the life story of the Buddha in his previous life. So there's one story that tells how in one of his previous lifetimes, there was a danger that 499 people faced by one evil person. So the Buddha in that previous life decided to kill that person, although killing another person is a prohibited action. He decided to kill that person in order to save the life of the remaining people, 499 people. So this story is given an example of certain scenarios where you have to look at a certain course of action and have a certain consideration of the prohibition versus the necessity of behaving in such a way. So let's look at a commentary to this section. It says, having understood the need for the benefit of self and others, act like this with all your physical and verbal actions. So we looked at application to other behaviors, and now we're going to look at the last point in examining the conduct of body and speech, which is examining the posture. Let's look at verse 39. It says, initiate your actions thinking, I shall abide with my body like this. From time to time, check how your body is abiding.
Something then nature devi kabdulara ani dego horas ayina ani ta gashada gobi ongi ani ya ko yotango ya soba o dindi ngoras ta dindi dojliya songdan reshasra.
So for example, when we do our meditation practice, there are certain characteristics to the seat of absorption. This is how it is called. So you sit for your meditation, you sit in a certain posture and a certain seat. It is called a seat of absorption. And while the description outlines how you should do it, still in certain situations, you need to look at what is the prohibition versus what is the necessity of staying in a certain posture and work out what works best for you.
Dindilaya shuyo but the day over the when tembe symbol chichin on the tembanyamba lupugi something then yoba in ya same bed and example in Koraja there tindi ungoras tembe masana and tembe symbol chichin lu chadar shingi and same laya same ya and tagarana ne tuyagi and kensu di Chembala Tuoras, Chembe Song Chikores, Chembe Song Takores.
After all, this seat for absorption is a seat for cultivating mindfulness. So it might be that your body is sitting on a certain seat, but your mind is traveling all over the world. In that sense, mindfulness has declined and your mind is traveling all over the place. So when we sit down upon a certain seat for cultivating meditation, the seat needs to be comfortable so that the mind would be comfortable in cultivating mindfulness. It should be providing assistance or support for developing mental mindfulness.
내 강도 데비치 레베나노야 내 강도 데비치 류긴데 내가 차오시 삼디 류기 차와 동 에니 파코 수 류디 쫄음 쳤다고 내가 인시 따버 차시 네바메 군절은 내가 차오스
In the commentary to verse 39, it says, after having had a thought, I shall remain in this position, stop the actions of the body and place it for the time being in the planned position. Look in the explained way from time to time, checking how the body is abiding and strive to act without faults.
니바 셈비 군절은 따버라 니 게위 미발라 담바탄 게와다 찌지와 줄민줄 따버워스 담보 게위 미발라 담바니 셈기 란친 형바니 최가 셈비 까치만 제대로 따보면 좋아 대단 배워고 있다스
In making effort to purify all conduct of the three doors, we've looked at the first point, examining the conduct of body and speech. Let's look at the second point, which is examining the conduct of the mind, consisting of 2 points, focusing the mind on a virtuous object and examining whether or not the mind is one pointed in virtue. Now, first off, looking at verse 40, it says, check with all your effort that the crazy elephant's mind does not lose the great Dharma pillar the way it was fastened to it.
들다 저단이 난전 난추디 난추 송디 남기다 라마 코모초리다 간지 아니 동하 참나와야 난추 인고디 아니 셈기 땡기 아니 차와지 바디 세우슈디로 아스로 셈 교와탄 투야기 셈 마로 이차디 아니 gyurni 셈 레기 차라야 그 투야기 탑시디 단 난추 탑는 약수디 데려왔어 인자 난추 짜와디 셈을 두고 연자 아니 주 셈을 달리고 연자 아니 셈디 가서다 담투나 아니 룽아 예수님 아니 미길 곧 사말로 담투고 여바다 아니 셈디 쩨마투나 아니 룽아 예수님 곧이다 미기 쳐야다 베디 아니 고체버다 우치 차두고 여바디 대한 내기 연자 아니 셈베 토마메바니 다지 란진 형보다 아니 곰댕이 셈디 아니 추 까치나야 아니 젬베 담고레스 다디 띵인지 기 가두시야바이나 다디 소디 벤디 토니 송기어리사 람람다 가와이나야
All the great masters of the past are in agreement that the Buddhist tradition is dealing with, is explaining a way of progressing on the basis of the mind. When you look at the sutra system, the mantra system, all those systems are explained on the basis of mind. The Buddhist tradition is seeking to transform the mind from positive states, from inappropriate states to positive states of mind. This is the basis of the Dhamma. This is the root of the Dhamma. And in order to do that, we focus on the mind. We're basing ourselves on the mind. So whatever activities we take of body, speech, and mind, they depend upon the mind. So we want to bind the mind. We want to fasten the mind so that our activities will accord with positive states. Otherwise, if we do not do that, there is a danger that our activities of body, speech, and mind will become non-virtuous activities. After all, since Samvita beginning and up until now, our mind has behaved like a crazy elephant. So we need to fasten that crazy elephant to a certain virtuous object, and we do that using the rope of mindfulness.
semji langchen matoshi yambani chirdu chawa kinyan chula sembi migbi kachan la chidar tabu mechowa hedar beba kunji tabar chawos.
Now, in the case, let's look at the commentary to verse 40, which says, check with all your effort that the unsubdued and crazy elephant mind does not lose the great pillar of the Dhamma object that one accepted to contemplate single-pointedly, the way one fastened to the mind to fastened the mind to it.
Nipa gewala tsichikbar gyur mengyur tabanis rangi semdi gewala ya tsichikdu pe eni nebachi du mundu tagbar tere takanji chini tenzin sombani kech chikyam mechowa dagi yingzi khadruchi tedar yigla soso tags.
So we looked at focusing the mind on the virtuous object and examining the conduct of the mind. And now we're going to look at examining whether or not the mind is one pointed in virtue, which is covered by verse 41. It states, however, I strive in concentration. I shall not let loose for even one moment. What does this mind of mine do, I ask? Analyze the mind in detail in this regard.
Terida tengin leya zembigi and tongi tokis the same kitchik chigyam and machawa pigi and give me balaya ne goya sagi ne dumundu tayanta the kitchik chigi minse sejoras kitchik chigi minse.
So we want to inspect, we want to make sure that when we cultivate concentration, that the mind does not wander off to other objects for not even a second, not even a minute, that it still remains single-pointedly without wavering upon the object.
That catching my chick sadly, that Tara Mamu shoot, Tara Mamu shoot, Yumioris. That's all the Chavo catching my chicks lavana, Chawa Zob catching my chicks lavana, Chawa bin go to me, and Jude Johnson Park, Tuzetelea, and Chavo catching my cigarettes.
We want to make sure that the mind does not waver away from the object for not even a moment or a fraction of the moment. Now, a moment is described in the Buddhist tradition as having a variety of meaning. There are different, you can say, periods of time, or extents of time that a moment can last. Like, for example, you can define a moment as what the time period that it takes to complete an action. So in that sense, you have started to undertake a virtuous activity, and there is a certain duration that is required in order to bring that activity to completion. That is one moment. So you want to make sure that your mind does not waver from that object for even a moment, and that until you bring that action to completion.
Tereda, Chazoji Kejing me Tonga Chiksadi, Chazoji Kejing me Tonga Chiksadi, the Namgi Yondalaya, Umazella Sovigi, and Shona Kontuni, and the Digi Dabigi, Chatu Chiranga Chibi, Chachilaya, and Chazoji Kejing me Tonga Chiks, and the Sungarians.
Then sometimes you hear about the shortest moment. In the system of the Abhidhamma, the shortest moment of time is classified as 1/65 of the time it takes to snap one's finger, right? So we have snapping of one's finger divided by 65 portions of time. That is the shortest time that is explained by the Abhidhamma, in the Abhidhamma system.
That the catching my tongue should be, to catching my tongue should be, Revesana, Pesci, the Insamaris. And Tuki catching my tongue should be, Pesan di Shagdata, Tuki catching my tongue should be, Nanzugi Sujelaya, Dultarabshin, should try do the Namki Dulsage, Tegua. that dul shin the duldi tinji you duldi any gujich pilaya gubi charge yours at dult shin the duldi you charge yours you chadi any tuji tonshulaya tu tonshudi tu chashudi teleyamunzi chingos.
So this is what is stated in the Abhidhamma. That now, looking at that in a way that is more contemporary, you can say that that's not the shortest moment in time. The shortest moment of time could be defined, could be viewed as the slight quivering of movement of a subtle particle that is called space particle. So when we think of breaking down physical things into different particles, there is one particle that is called space particle. The time span of quivering, just like movement of that space particle, is said to be the shortened period of time, or the shortest moment.
Tilda digiti kansna kechikni kechik masagi chachashudi the metabi chamudi any kechik malaya metabi thin shaundi di kechik tenda di katsu sigi pigilaya any chamu samutang tuba di chugi any metabi thendi kawadi chat things up and rising red was rough.
So when we think of this shortest moment of time, what we're getting at is impermanence. Not only we want to think of impermanence, we want to also develop an understanding of subtle impermanence. So the more subtle and refined your examination of impermanence becomes, like, for example, in thinking of the shortest moment in time, the greater your understanding is of subtle impermanence. Jace?
I just want to, Geshe said that the shortest period of time is equivalent. I remember when we did, went through the death process with disillusion. Geshe said when you actually reflect in the realization where the mind is dormant, sort of like still. And then what causes it to arise is like an agitation or a quivering. I just wondered if there's a similarity with the shortest period of time.
So I'm just going to repeat your answer just to make sure that I got it right. So we spoke before of the process of death and impermanence, the dissolution of the elements and so forth. So now in the last moment when we have either realization of emptiness or we have the clear light of death becomes manifest. So when we think of then the slight movement, are you talking about the slight movement of the wind element that supports the, so when there's that slight movement of the wind element that supports that extremely subtle consciousness, this is when we say that the body state is established, right? So there's the brief moment where there's a movement of the wind element. So is the shortest moment in time also related to the quivering of or movement of the wind element?
So now, Bodhisattva talks about like the 60 moments or 64 moments. Geshe was talking about is a mere imputing.
Is the what?
Is a mere imputing of the object. First one, like Geshe says, that the actual first one, all the mind is labeled.
All right. So because you say that also Lama Sovereign, but you referred to that, in the dividing certain duration into 65 moments, and you said that it's the shortest moments of time, kind of before imputing an object. Anyway, let's see what Geshe says. So Quran timberimba kapsola tamala chue visit mundu joe kapsola yang kabdila shintu tawe longshwa shintu tawe long dishun be sem sashto kabdila shindu chaves long di yawaina kabdila nganso hado drugires chik sashto chesan yobe kapsia di tading kechik tamo chik segiro chesan yo kechik tamo di tan kechik thongwa sa di kechik ma thongwa sa di tungsho di chikparves
re
아니 얀 디가나 얀 쿠란 니마 소버린 버치 순치 슈드 소버린 버치 얀 카마가 카사 툭추나 요치 작투 투주 나사죠 쿠란 디셈 로 카사 로 마타콘라 케직 통화치 요레사 나 유치 통화 이나로와 yu di tone nis chik semtagirwa yu di re semtagirwa chinsan di kechik hasa chatung chushele nga gugres tene chikpar ves ta kuran di kechi shetan sewo mindwa di kuran yan nenga di sewo chida sa
cha trugju renga di yongda ki pigi ngombo zuni pigi shede tindi keji ma joras tindi keji ma ta ji rob zang ngo zhe che ja di toni song de ji mambu shu cha gores ni trugju renga chi bi cha ji dile cha wa ge keji mi yong se ji yo ma res no ya chi ya tham da di yores ra yo ba ma se pe na tindi gi tseri go so ina ya and daily traveling and to the one's chitu dasra pena and the selling big then a pabi and dul chamo that page concept tani the nanki dul segi yeme mishimato kanji tinji dul chamo di 패싱 문제 치투고여서 그래서 이제 딘 구비 차디다 아니 깨지고 참고 샤초 그래서 초고 두세 아니 세비 비시기였어야지 니딘지 통소스 디페니지 그렇지 라
이네 깨직 통화세야디 이야와 제마 두가 되는 시간이라
이야와 치기 매바지 아니 참매세야디 양 참매 등이리 모두 차진 등이기 디시작 말하다
제가 수디 켈랭게르베
켈랭 말와 이내야 비기 돌신도 탐문디 켈랭으로 돌신도 탐문디 참매레스라 말이 거기에 참매우 차지예요 코이 이어비 차여스 야시야도 여러다 그래서 디 이어비 차디 아니 당근 뒤기 차 참문지야 문제 지나 제초사리스
이네 차신데 라기로 야마 참모치는
그래서 차신라 좋았었어
네 차시세야디라 딜레 야와체 투이 마레스니 과민과
여체 투 마르슬라고 말다 딜레야 아니 차치 투 마르슬 라요 말와 딜레야 차치예요라 거의 그 참모디야 아니 이어와디 아니 고츠고다 조야치 체저라다
So first of all, you mentioned the movement or the quivering of the subtle wind that supports the subtle mind of the clear light of death. So there's a slight movement of that wind. So you can say that the moment that wind moves, in a sense that there's that brief moment of time, you can say, even as brief as the one that Geshe described, this is where the Bado state has been established. So Geshe agrees with that. But in general, there is a presentation that is given in the Abhidhamma Kosha, which is, you could say that the most commonly accepted presentation, or the one that is kind of the most renowned presentation, that says that the shortest moment of time is 60 or 65 parts of the moment it takes to snap one's finger. Now, this is what the Abhidhamma says, but this is just a coarse explanation. Right? It's a very coarse explanation. If you then think of what the Abhidhamma says and you wonder, so is it not possible to further on divide that 1/65th or 1/65th of the moment it takes to snap one's finger? Well, of course, you can further on divide that moment. So how far will you go with that division? Well, you can get at very, very subtle moments in time, split seconds or fractions of seconds and so forth. Geshe doesn't know if in contemporary science, and of course scientists will also agree that you can divide time and get a more and more refined periods of time or moments of time. Geshe is not sure that in science they would speak about space particles, but at least from a Buddhist perspective, looking at how we use terminology in Buddhist perspective, you can say that, of course, you can further on divide this 150, 60, 1/65 of moment of time and then get a very subtle moment, which is the time it takes for a quivering of space particle. Now, doesn't mean to say that that shortest moment that short moments of time can no longer be divided, in that is it partless? Well, of course, in our school of thought, we wouldn't say that there is a partless moment of time that can no longer be divided. In the same way that also when we check physical phenomena and start to look at particles, subtle particles, atomic level and so forth, we wouldn't agree that you can get at a subtle particle that can no longer be divided, that is a partless particle. So we do assert that there are no partless particles, and also that there are no moments of time that are partless. So then in my discussion with Geshe, I said that, so that being the case, can you speak about the subtlest moment in time, or the shortest moment of time? You can say that it's very subtle, but can you speak about it as the most subtle, given that it can still be divided further on? Well, Geshe said that you can say that it is very subtle. And in Tibetan, you can say that it is also most subtle. Whether you can say that this is the most subtle, that to the point where it can no longer be divided, Geshe says that you cannot say that. It is most subtle, but still can be divided further on, because we do not accept partless particles.
Kejima ta tushudi shasra ta ine kolaya chachiye ina kolli tongi tuji yorasn da di shagro yumarsra kolaya chachiye yosadi bananganzu durtamu delaya ani chayores ko chame maris ra chame maimba kanzna ko shalno ko chachiye cha odo yan dul shuld tag dul di 양코 tumbi sum tayo keji diremudos 콜파 나도 도도도는 짜고 아니 파춘주소에 keji diremudos 이나신기 딘디기 슌데 트레비 둘디 그비 연세저라 연세 딜리기 아니 뒤 통하지 여러스나 디요 말이스 이네 뒤 통통들이야 든든도디 아니 뒤기 참여되었으나 참여 말이 차치예요. 드리려고 왔어요.
So then Geshe is refining this explanation. It says that when we speak about the most subtle particles, we assert that there are no partless particles. So when you examine the most subtle particle, when we say that this particle is not partless, because you can still assert directions with respect to this particle. There is north, south, east, and west with respect to that particle. But if you ask, can you divide that particle, the most subtle particle, further on into particles that are even smaller? Geshe says that we do not assert that. We do not assert that it can further on be divided into more minute parts. We assert that it is not partless from the viewpoint of still having directions. So it's not like you can divide a particle in smashing a rock on it or kind of hitting it with a hammer and so forth. It's not that it can further on be divided into smaller parts, but it still have directional parts. A similar thing can also be said with respect to the most subtle moment of time. So it is subtle moment of time, and we do not accept that it is partless. But then it's not the same as saying that it can still be divided further on into even more shorter moments.
So we say the position that because it's not partless, but it's so subtle that you can't divide it anymore. It seems like there's a crossover there, but it's so subtle that you can't divide it anymore. That you sort of seems inevitable that you Buddha nature becomes apparent, like base reality.
The what?
Buddha nature gets more, let me rephrase it, gets more and more subtle to the point that we can't divide it, what Geshe is saying. But it still has parts, but because of that subtlety, you sort of, you're in the realm of a perceptual realization and activity. So that's where it becomes manifest. That's my understanding.
So 그런 삼초디 카르스나 근데 신도 차웨 주단디 요체 야와체 마토베 캡슐라와 갑딜라이 차모 차기요잔 디타웨 샘디 toning muso toppe lodende ci sha chogerbes.
저 말이지. 돈이 무슨 돈을 뒤집지 자고 말아. 뒤집지 자고 말했어요.
So Avis is asking if I can repeat what Jason said. Sorry, I didn't repeat it. So Jason was asking if it gets to the point where that subtle particle is so subtle, it can no longer be divided into smaller particles. So can you say that the mind perceiving it is so subtle that it is a perceptual realization of emptiness? So Geshe says no. You cannot say that the mind that perceives the particle is a mind that perceptually realizes emptiness. So there were a few questions here. Sorry?
The smallest particle that you can't divide physically into parts. Is that what Geshe was calling the space particle?
So the smallest particle that can no longer be divided into parts is that what Geshe calls space particle.
Is that what he means by space particle?
지금 여와체미 튜베 두전 차슈로 근데 난카기 두 데르베스 kan nankagi du chi lainba derbes
dan namki dul selawata chidam namki dul naya mambu yoros ine pi ta tashu kanji dul tashu lawores
says nanki dul tashu and ya mituba
pi ye mutu sedi yanja khapsha ta me ju chiwala odi
Well, there are different types of space particles. Still, in general, we say that this space particle is that very subtle particle that cannot be broken into particles that are even smaller.
So the first one, the space particle, can that be very subtle? Can that not be divided because it's space?
So that space particle, can it not be divided because it's space?
I mean, apart from it can be divided into directions, but
Yeah.
actually as entity.
Just nanka dusia di ye michasa di nanka imbe gyumtsen chene dirves.
namka nganzu namgyu dumachi gi namka se di dida namki dul nimudi logareshas ro dumachi ni namka se di ko to Pada Rapa Katsam Chadi, Dimachi Chetal Shabudas. Ra. Inaya, Tanda Di, Dul Digin, in Tanin Di, so Yonsadi, Tandanganzo, Tunko Gunani, Shegoles.
Since this whole topic of space particles is like opening a can of worms, so maybe now it will be opening a can of space particles. So Geshe says that when we speak about space, it is not uncompounded space, right? So we have space, we have uncompounded space. So uncompounded space is just a mere negation of contact and obstructive contact, right? So mere absence of obstructive contact is what we call uncompounded space. That's one way that we use this word space. It refers to uncompounded space. Now, when we speak about space particle, it is not that, right? So the space particle, this term was coined at the Kalachakra Tantra. So it is in the Kalachakra Tantra that this space particle is being brought up.
So it's matter.
Shenzan Bemborbis.
Pembo Lago Marta Chitangi, Nazugi, Kasada, Nanzu Semi Shonda, Mumbi Shondaya, Suda Pembo Tenji Sage. Ani Dul the Pembo Tenji Sage. And D down, Tandangandia, Yondi Pig. And this is this Jagmadus, Pena long in by Pembo Mogova.
Well, not quite. So when we look at the Pramana system and the Abhidhamma system, form and matter are said to be equivalent or synonymous. But then when you start looking into that, when you kind of, when you open the subject and then go in a way that is more and more extensive, you can say that, well, in the Abhidhamma system or the Pramana system, a particle is matter. Still, when you then start to think of other things, like, for example, wind is not matter.
The second one.
Your second question?
So time is not matter. So time is conceptual. So why can't it be further divided?
Conceptual
Well, we impute time.
Okay.
So if time, why is it that time can't be further divided? Yes, we have whatever moment of time is going to be past, debatable, present, at least past and future. Right? But why can't that be further divided down? Because it's non-material.
So time is not matter. It is imputed by mind. Why is it that we cannot divide time further on? We can divide time into past, present, and future. But then when we get to these subtle moments of time that Geshe spoke of, why do we say that that can no longer be divided? Quran 2 säger det Pemomaris. Lut takbad kelengiores. Tadi 2 säger det Teba tandawa maomba de yawacheriores. Da du kechik 2 säger det
2.
Ja.
2 Pembo Maris.
Ja. Sen 2 the kechik hamadi tashudi yawachemi tuwegi gyumsen karinas.
Yewachip Mudusadi, call it tag to Shamutu, Ginsakari Segore, and
Jadira pesce di Teba tandawa maomba Yo chem.
진짜 코가 아니 딘지기 마음이 뒤참지 용초그래서 용초그래서 이내 신의 뒤 코랑이야 뒤 코랑이 뒤 통하지 뒤지기 열배스나 니코 통슈들이 슬라디 텔레 통하지 내가 땡 것도 왔어 이내 마음이 뒤 참을 여처럼 니비 뒤 참을 샤초그래디 샤초그래서.
Yeah, you can speak about time in terms of past, present, and future. You can speak about future time. But then when you divide time into shorter and shorter moments, you get to the most subtle moment. And it is said that that can no longer be divided, can no longer be broken into something that is even shorter.
제가 단디 대링기 비기 아니 뒤 참은디 에 대링이 지그로래 산이 뒤 참은지 내기로스 마음이 뒤 차기로스 이내야 대링 뒤 참은디게 뒤 대리 뒤 차와지 용체 통하지 열어봤으나 디요 말했어.
This subtle moment of today will disintegrate. It disintegrates, and tomorrow, which means in the future, there would be also a subtle moment. But then when you look into that subtle moment, that most subtle moment can no longer be divided into something that is even shorter.
Really, we can say that the most subtle moment of time is just a mere imputation. It's a conventionality. But under analysis, ultimate analysis, you can continue dividing that most subtle moment into past, present, and future, and arrive at the emptiness of the inherent existence of any moment of time. To put another meaning of what Geshe was saying, there is actually a consciousness realizing a subtler moment of time than that asserted in the Abhidharma presentation. So a consciousness realizing a subtler moment of time with respect to the vibrational space particle, which is a much shorter period than the.
So what is the question?
This is a condition I'm putting forward and asking if Geshe agrees with that.
So your interpretation of that, I'm not sure that I got it right. So your interpretation of that says that there is so when we speak about here about the short moments of time, we're speaking about conventional. It's a mere invitation, mere conventionality, and ultimate analysis. It is empty of existing inherently, what have you. So
continue to divide that most subtle moment into past, present, and future infinitely and arrive at the emptiness of its inherent existence.
So you can continue to divide this moments of time, short moments of times in the past, present, and future, and you will get an emptiness. Yeah.
And the second part is so is another meaning what Geshe was saying, that actually the Abhidharma asserts this most subtle moment of time, and there's actually another interpretation of the subtle consciousness realizing subtle moment of time.
So you want to reaffirm that this is what you had. Yeah. So kind of you want to just reaffirm that you had that there is one text, the Abhidharma Kosha, that asserts a shortest moment of time, which is 1/65 of the snapping of one's finger, and then there's another text that speaks about even something that is more subtle, which is the quivering of space particle.
Which would mean there's a subtle consciousness realizing that subtle moment of time.
Which will mean that there is also a subtle consciousness that realizes this subtle moment of time. Chizan Quran la de chiwa ramare. The Quran dende da wachi the best, and the Quran kochu the daran the best. Chizan Quran kechi la Kichi is Yawacha in Arwa. Ni Tabatanda or Mamba the Chik Yawacha Resa. Ani then the Yawacha in Tamo Chewaina, not so duty Konzovla Shimchi Resa. In a do Casa Duta then the Tashu de la Lewaina. Ni Yawache Matue Tone Dilatene Tony Dogger Vesket.
tel ten is lonely, Cocoa Mombulandos. Tel ten Tony Tog Chogres, no Chogres. Because if we ever chill, could feel a yard. And two Jetang, two singing, and Hashila ten Shamado, Hashila Madibi, two sage, Yomaras, Tanji, Anichigilari. Could learn that something. Pembo Maris, China Chigleson. In the Zavi Chepanche, Pemboina, Louis Taxamre, Pembomena, Chekanjin, Louis Taxamre. How do the two sing Louis Taxam body, two the Hashila Demi, any two women's in Chingle model, any Shem Hashila Madembi, round to be two chicks in your maros. Is it the G, whichever trouble chill, any Hashila Tinsuton. Two ton xiangdi, tended the and Joshua Chimboyodi, Silchagos, Del Penny, and Tony Toyadi, Yon Chosaros.
Also, with respect to your first question, you can realize emptiness. It depends upon an analysis of time, breaking time into past, present, and future. So it is possible to use that, so that it depends upon that you can't realize emptiness. But then the way that Geshe has spoken about it, it did not say or did not agree overtly that when you divide time, just the mere division of time into brief, into shorter moments, and get into the point in which you can no longer divide time into shorter moments, then you will have a consciousness that realizes emptiness. So in the sense of Geshe, I'd say that I would not agree with that, but what he did say is that it depends upon that you can realize emptiness, because when you analyze when you analyze time, for example, then you come to see that time is posited in relation. It is merely imputed by mind. It is merely imputed by mind in that time, for example, is relative to earlier and latter. Right, so you posit time in relation to something that is earlier, or the earlier and the latter. It is merely imputed by mind. Also, Chuki referred to that. He's saying that, for example, time is merely imputed by mind. It is not matter. Matter is imputed by mind, merely imputed by mind. That which is not matter, other things, other phenomena which are not matter, are also merely imputed by mind. So when you consider time to be merely imputed by mind, and you realize the emptiness of the mind, what you realize is that time is not independent, that it is not independent from earlier and latter. Had time been not related to earlier or latter, it would have meant that time exists independently, but that is not the case. Time does not exist independently. It is relative.
There's nothing also saying which said that it's Kashmir Vegetarian was. Nichidang Seri Jan, Seri morning, Seri Jan Homarda. Inia, Yarumachi, Nulusum Jud Tagrinaya, Seri were Mambo and Yang, Kadurnangi, any Kalam Yere, Di Kadurnan Shagiti, my Yitola Pamni, Temam Teoris, Pena, and it send the sogi. So the same test of cell. La soba down. And the king gi cola cell soba. And the dig chabe mambu or stuff. The soon on the only, the soon geon dig. And it jabber chedan di, that susu mizana piggy. and cholan chudala sobigi, and Timi Shonlaya, and Kanakan Jamba Chebadan, Gomulutu Yarsila sobigi, Umi Shonlaya, Kanakan Jamba Chevenda, the so could they would red last. The Majana mother, the zoo, the sick Peju Chetanda, Shimju Chetandi, any Tanda Timi Shoni, Shimju Chetanda, Umi Shoni, Shimju Chetandina, and then hard as Madovi, Kalika Rogis, Yomarestra, the number to Siwana, and the engine and Temambu to Samanala, and bed and shoots out or Tangores.
Now, Geshe in his explanation used certain terms, and those terms have an equivalent in science. So Geshe also kind of sometimes just says science, but then Geshe said that he hasn't studied science before, right? So whatever he says, it's not based on having studied science. But then it's honest, the Dalai Lama has been having an exchange between Buddhism and scientists from different fields of knowledge over the past 3 decades. And there are different books that were composed based upon this dialogue. And some of them are available in Tibetan. So there's a book that refers to mind and life and so forth. Anyway, when Geshe reads through some of this material, it says that the understanding of what is stated is made easier through having studied the presentation of the Brahmana system, the system of Dharmakirti or Dignaga, and also the system of the middle way view, the Madhyamika system championed by Nagarjuna. So having studied those systems, the Brahmana system and the Madhyamika system, which employs a certain mode of analysis and investigation, when you then turn your mind to look at how topics such as time is presented from a scientific perspective, Geshe reckons that the logic, the analysis, investigation works in a way that is similar. So it is easier then to develop an understanding of the presentation that is coming more from the scientific perspective. And since, again, Geshe said that since he hasn't studied science before, it's not that kind of he has the full understanding of the terms that he used in science, but still there is kind of the mode of analysis seems to be quite similar.
I was just going to ask if we all seem to accept when you say a particle, the smallest particle that can't be divided still has direction. Can we say the smallest particle, time, can't be divided, but it still has a beginning and an end?
So
they might be simultaneous.
So we spoke about the smallest particle that can no longer be divided, but it still has direction, north, south, and so forth. So could we say also that the smallest moment of time cannot be divided into shorter moments, but it still has a beginning and end, and they're simultaneous? Could be simultaneous. Student Tashi said the Chame Mares and Lagarwa, the Chogi Chachayores, in it, Dilla Chat Chua Pechayache to Mares and Ladwa, and the Quran do said the two Ketchik Tashu the Yawachematua in a do two Tonga than the Shatugi Mares, in a Dilla Tomatan Tama than the Shayorves. Ketchik Tashu Dilla Tomatan Tama Yorves Tomatan Tama said the Dunyan La Shagirves conditions.
Di kasoda chidangi tanda peshi tseriwe dilago sali dul chamulaya thoma yomares dul chamugi thoma penanganzu gi shibi gi thoma mebani 정말 지원난신기 and 늘 참으면 통만 매워 지기도 있어. 그 통만 매워 지운 게 아니 가서다 뒤 참고 되려야 통만 매스 라고 것을 통만 매스 라고 것을
Dulyaman too.
늘 참고래 통만 매워야지 뒤 참고 되려야 아니 통만 매워는 중요하지.
In to Rapadira Tomatan Tamatinde.
뒤 잡박이 빼는 건 뒤지단 로가라 빼는 딩 고츠는 죽마저 그렇게 지어라. 디 아니 피기들이 체투비어 말했어. 신도 타비 뒤들이야. and 디 체투비어 말했어.
Chazandila Tomatinde Shatu Maris.
샤투 말했어.
Well, it's a good question. It's a wicked question. So
I was hoping the answer would just be yes.
well, things cannot be made that easy. Can they? So, first of all, with respect to particles. So we speak about minute particles, right? Minute particles have no beginning. We say that, for example, mind has no beginning, right? Also, similar thing can be said also with respect to minute particles. They have no beginning. Now, what about short or brief moments of time? So getting to your answer, also to that, Geshe said that they have no beginning. So as Geshe, like you said, that the minute portion of times or those short moment of times have no beginning, can you therefore say that also coarse moment of time cannot have beginning? Well, Geshe said that with respect to snapping your finger, for example, and dividing it into different portions of time, you can speak about when it started. Right, this is the point of start. But then with respect to the minute moment of time, you cannot assert the beginning.
제디 빼나 늘 참고디 이게 신도 참고디 지 요위 차지오라서 요위 차지 다디코 아니 군도 순구데디 아니 고츠니 피길레 마데 바기 디케제 디셰고 사마레스 디셰바이나 콜리아 고츠원이 아니 피 데비 차지 지 요르와스 디체저스 디페시 셰고 사마레스 콜리아 콜 신도 비 돌타모델이야 요위 차지 요레스 디 요위 차디 뒤타모 디샤그레스 델라야 아니 요위 차델이야 아니 고기 잡아니 데비 참세 딘디 깨져디 체계여서 말했어. 뭐는 난가 잘봐.
그래 난가처럼.
구니 아니 마데 발라야 구바데 데바니 뒤녀버려갔으나
고고스는 고추바.
고기 잡아.
Can be made more complicated. So, imagine that. So for example, with respect to subtle particles, minute particles. So in relation to minute particles, you can also speak about quivering or the movement. So there is this movement of minute particles. So you can speak about this part of movement. But with respect to this part of movement, you cannot speak about when it begins or when it moves and when it does not move. There's movement. You cannot speak about the beginning or the inception of that movement or that quivering. So the quivering, the movement of that subtlest particle, that minute particle, can also be spoken of in terms of a minute portion of time, period of time. So that can no longer be divided into other parts of time, in a sense that you cannot say that at this point in time it moves, at this point in time it stays.
Thank you. 뒤통수도 차서.
Thank you. It seems that we came to a brief moment before we have to take a break. So let's do some serious dedications. That's not a dedication, sorry. There it is. Lama Sangye Dugene, Yoachika Malupa, De Salagopa, Rinpoche, Make Panaki, Kepan Yamba Mepaya, Kone Kondo Kawash, Kowe Shinkan, and Underwa Mother Jumi, Chinese Shape Sidi Pado Technology, Sojo Jubela, Seche Jubela, Tana Demo Tenzia Sola, Sola Depso, Jangri Yahweh Tenzi Yong Kawe Dunso Poche, Joson Kowe Lemon Tudruka, Taso Duje Kondu Shate.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I need to